Hi, I'm Jordana Zeldin. I'm the co-founder of the Practice Lab. And the worst advice I ever received was that you had to spend time in the SDR trenches to be an effective account executive.
You don't have to spend time in the SDR trenches to be an effective AE. Come on, Jordana, who told you this?
You don't. So back in the day when I was on a sales team, I was the top performing rep after I figured out what the hell I was doing, but I would have made the shittiest, can I swear on this show?
Sure.
Probably. The shittiest SDR on the planet, the stamina, the patience, the attention to detail that it takes following up, running through your cadences, keeping those CRM records up to date. Just none of that is my skill set. But I love helping people. I'm curious about people. And it made me a good AE. But if I had to start as an SDR, I never would have made it ever.
Okay. So,
So,
I've heard that too. So you believe then that
yeah.
SDR and AE are very separate skill sets, then, huh?
I would say that they require different skill sets. Some of them are overlapping, but I think the stamina, the organization, the imperative of having a good process that requires and makes for a great SDR does not necessarily mean you'll be a great AE, which is not to say that you can't be a great AE if you haven't spent a lot of time really nailing your process and attention to detail.
Hmm.
But I like to encourage sales leaders to think about hiring account executives who have not sold before and who have not been SDRs. So,
Oh, wow. That's interesting. Jonathan,
yeah.
what do you think about all this?
Well, I also skipped the SDR stage and went right into being an account executive. And while I've managed to prospect throughout my career, and I'm sure I would have figured it out, I also agree with Jordana that they are very different skill sets, right? What it takes to be really good at prospecting, what it takes to be really good at, getting curious, learning about people's needs, presenting solutions in a way that connects to those needs, managing stakeholder maps, helping run a change management, initiative at your buyer's company alongside them. Those are just fundamentally very different skill sets. So while there's certainly benefits to starting off as an SDR, yeah, I don't think it's necessary.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Well, Jonathan, I understand that you have some good advice for us, though. So, what's the best advice
Yes.
you ever received? Introduce yourself, my
Yes.
friend.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Mahan, co-founder of the Practice Lab, and the best advice I ever received is actually when I first went full time as an entrepreneur. One of my friends who had also kind of gone down the entrepreneurial path in years previous, recommended that I focus heavily on my inner world and like really make that my focus rather than like trying to gain more knowledge about how to run a business or get more skills as a copywriter, to just focus on my inner world of my mindset, my emotional regulation, my confidence, stuff of that nature. And that is something I've done, and it has proved, in fact, to make all the difference in the success and results I'm able to see.
Well, that's different advice. So, who you said it was an entrepreneur friend of yours that told you that. So, tell us how did you do that? How did you strengthen your mindset? What did you do?
So, probably the most important, well, there's two things, two specific routines I got into. One is at the very beginning of every workday, I spend the first hour taking care of my mind and body. So for me, that's like 15 to 30 minutes on the treadmill, right, to get blood flowing, oxygen pumping to the brain, and get my energy levels up. And then the next 30 minutes is spent in meditation, so that when I start the day physically and mentally, I'm primed and at my best. And the second routine is every night when I lay down in bed in that space where like you just lay down, but you know you're not about to sleep. I actually think through and think up three things that happened that day just in my personal life that I'm grateful for, three things that happened in my
Mm.
business life that I'm grateful for, and three things about myself that I saw evidence of that day that I'm grateful for. And those two routines have just done wonders for my performance and really making sure that I make the most out of the hours that I have during the day.
Oh my goodness. That's beautiful. And yet so often not done. So, Jordana, is that your habit as well, or what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big proponent of making sure that your inner world is in a good place. I'm also an active meditator. I don't have the same kind of commitment to the rigor of the schedule that Jonathan has, but when I'm meditating, when I'm moving my body, when I'm in nature, everything falls into place. So yeah, really important. And it's funny, we just came out of a practice session for cold callers on the importance of priming your inner game before you hop on a cold call. And participants, most of them hadn't done that before, and it made quite an impact on how their opener. We were practicing cold call openers. Both felt to deliver and how it felt for the practice partner who was playing the prospect to receive. So inner game is vital.
Wow. Well, let's start there then. So how do we do that? How do we get primed? How do we get ready, I guess, to give and to receive?
Yeah, so what we teach specifically in this cold calling situation, but of course it applies really to any time you're preparing for something, is three specific techniques that we learned from other disciplines. One is mantras, where you simply say to yourself the reality that you want to be as if it already were, right? So your mantra isn't, I want to be confident. Your mantra is, I am confident. I can do this. I've got this. Second technique that we teach people is visualizations, which again is well documented and researched and shown to improve performance. And this is where you visualize clearly in your mind an outcome that you want. And specifically, what we had people visualize in this situation is an outcome that would make you feel the way you want to feel right now, right? So if you want to feel confident right now, imagine yourself, in a case of a cold call, imagine yourself entering that meeting booked into your CRM as if it already happened, right? If you want to feel excited, imagine a situation where your prospect is having a conversation with their boss saying, oh my goodness, I can't believe it. I think we finally just found a solution for blank. We're going to be meeting with them on Tuesday. Do you want to come too? Picture that happening and you'll feel some of that excitement too, right? So that you'll actually have real excitement in your body. And the third technique to help prime the inner game is to remember and to think upon emotional memories, times in your life when you have genuinely felt the way you want to feel right now. And try to recall those memories vividly, and it'll help put you back in that zone. So, for cold calling, right, you might want to feel relaxed, you might want to feel confident, there's different things you might want to feel, but whatever it is, you can use these three techniques to really put your mind and brain in that state right before you jump into your calls.
And what is so cool, Phil, is that research has shown that only 7% of what we want to communicate to another human being, and this is true of a prospect on the other end of a cold call, is through our words. The rest is through our vibe, right? Our tone, and getting our inner game to a good place has a pretty big impact on how we're perceived on the outside, even if we're not aware of it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's really
Yeah.
cool. I hadn't thought about that, but certainly, when I'm coaching sales reps, sitting up straight, taking a deep breath, be
Yeah.
kind of priming the instrument, if you will, and being
Beautiful.
ready is super important. But I've not taught the three practices that you both just shared. So that's super cool. So I'm stealing those. So those are great. I really
Yeah.
like
They're
that.
yours.
Thank you. Thank
Use them in good health.
Yes, yes, absolutely. So with that, right? So you mentioned that 7% there. So talk to me about how that shift mentally, how that actually helps us sell better or be present better with our prospects and our salespeople. Jordana, we'll start with you.
Yeah, just to like zoom out a bit, one of the things that Jonathan and I have really agreed on, really from the very beginning, when we've known each other for like 2.5 years on LinkedIn, is that our sense is that the very best and most effective sales skills just so happen to be the best and most effective human skills. So all too often, and this was me, especially in early on in my sales career, like I thought that like I had to be somebody else or leave myself at the door and kind of put on a mask in order to be the salesperson version of myself. And there was a real disconnect there for a number of years. And the entire approach that we've developed to selling and the exercises that we teach in the lab, in the practice lab, are really about helping people to ground themselves in their experience of being good, kind, generous, and helpful human beings. And when people bring those values into their selling and those approaches where they feel as comfortable trying on an objection handling technique with a practice partner or a prospect as they do with their partner or their kid, because it's so human, then something pretty magical can ignite in the life of a human who just so happens to be a salesperson. And of course, inner game is a big part of that, but intention is also really important too. all too often, there's this really yucky baggage associated with who and what sellers are and should be doing, right? We're tricking, we're manipulating, we're pushing. But especially now with this younger, newer generation of sellers where alignment between who they are and their values and their job feels more important than ever, it's like this big energizing sigh of relief when they hear that yes, all of the values they hold as a human being, all of the things that they aspire to do and be are exactly what will make them effective sellers.
Wow. That is such great news, right? For our new
Have you heard the
sellers.
news?
Well, it is though. I mean, I'm not,
Yeah.
I read a lot of sales books and a lot of sales blogs and listen to a lot of sales podcasts. I mean, sales is my jam. And so to hear that, I mean, it reinforces so much of what I believe as well. My job, I believe in sales enablement, sales training, sales coaching, whatever the heck you want to call it, is to bring forth the best of the person that I am working with so that they can be comfortable, so that they can be their awesome self. Because ultimately, that's why we hired them. Not because they're a great closer, great opener, they write great email, they do whatever they do, but because they're a great human being and someone that I want to spend time with. So I love that. That's such beautiful news. So, Jonathan, anything to add to that?
I think on just a practical standpoint, what Jordana shared, right, is true. They've done research, and 7% of the emotional impact of what we're communicating comes from the words. The other 93% comes from body language, vocal cues, right? Things you can see and hear. And that stuff is stuff that we really don't have much control over. A lot of that stuff is unconscious, right? I'm not actively choosing what to do with my eyebrows right now. I'm just kind of doing whatever they do on their own. And a lot of that nonverbal communication, again, has its root in our inner world and how we're feeling at the moment. So you might think to yourself, it doesn't matter if I feel like crap inside, I'll just like put a good face on. But that's not how it works. Again, 93% is based on nonverbals, and nonverbals are mostly out of your control. So you address the inner game, and then the nonverbals flow naturally from there. And you'll find yourself
Yeah.
in a much, much different types of conversations, right? Where the feel of the conversations is very different because you're just bringing this certain energy that, again, you can't always control. The other person can't even always put their finger on it, but they'll notice the difference between when you show up on that call full of gratitude and excitement versus when you show up on that call full of fear, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. That's so cool. So with that, I'd be remiss, right? You're the practice lab, but 2.5 years, you guys met each other on LinkedIn. So how did this start? What the heck happened that said you guys want to work together?
So I mean, yeah. So I mean, I was coaching Jonathan for a while. We were doing some social justice work together. But Jonathan, why don't you tell the origin story of how this all began?
Yeah, so where it started is that about 2 years ago, I started a new role as an account executive at a new company. And it just like anyone does when they start a new role, I would spend my mornings doing onboarding and watching training videos. And it was really good training videos teaching us all the right stuff, the way to handle objections, great discovery questions to ask, the sales process to follow, really good stuff we were being trained on. Then in the afternoons, I would pull up Gong and watch recordings of real sales calls happening with my peers. And I found that there was like no overlap. Nobody was doing any of the stuff we were being taught to do. And it was this big reminder for me that there's a big difference between like intellectually understanding what good selling is and actually having the skills needed to pull it off on a real call. And the same is true of me as well, right? I fill my head with all sorts of knowledge, just like you, Phil, around what is good selling. But a lot of times in the heat of the moment, when the pressure's on, I'm on that discovery call, I can't really ask questions like Keenan would, right? I can't do it in the moment. I just don't have the mental, brain skills to pull that off in the heat of the moment. So I noticed there was this gap, right, between knowing and being able to actually do it. And then in the evenings, I was reading these really fascinating books, one called Peak, one called The Talent Code. And they were written by researchers who have spent decades studying top performers from, Olympic athletes to musicians to chess players to comedians, figuring out how they became the very best. And for each one of those disciplines, it was the same approach to taking what they knew in theory they should be doing and turning it into something they could actually do reliably come performance time. And what it was practice, and a specific type of practice the authors called deliberate practice. So that got me excited. Like, okay, so there is a way to close this gap between knowing and doing. And then I realized for myself as a seller, if I was going to become the seller I wanted to be, I needed practice to be able to take all the stuff I knew and move it into the world of things I could actually do. So the very earliest roots of this were like sessions I ran with my colleagues internally. Pretty soon after that, I brought Jordana on because she had experience as a sales trainer and really added a whole element of extra oomph and power to what we were doing. Then we started offering it to the public, and one thing led to another, and here we are. And this is our full-time gig right now, is doing this practice lab.
And I'll add too, Phil, like the big, I guess, question at the start was, could we actually adapt this approach to practicing, this deliberate practice thing that musicians and athletes do, in a way where it's really effective for salespeople? So we started out with these free cohorts of hand-raising account executives from companies all across the B2B landscape and tested cohort after cohort. Are behaviors changing? Are people getting better? And what we found, which was so incredible, is that hell yes, they were, and they wanted more. And that these were, role plays and practice that they didn't hate and dread. They found that they were rewarding, fulfilling, challenging, keeping them right at the edge of their abilities, which is where neuroscience and some of these amazing performance books say is where the quickest skill development happens. So I'll share that when we began this, it was really to kind of test a hypothesis. And we're now at a place where we've had, 2 paid cohorts and are also working with sales teams where we feel confident that this deliberate practice thing can really shake things up, because, the status quo in most sales training historically is we talk at you, we give you a lot of great information with beautiful slide presentations, and then sellers are largely left to their own devices to figure out, how to take that knowledge into what they can do. And one of the amazing things is, not surprisingly, is that we found that one of the top reasons that sellers don't do the thing that they've learned is because the stakes are so high on their prospect calls. They're like, oh, I heard that thing in a book, but this call just feels too high stakes to try that. I'll do it on the next one, right? But with this practice piece, they have this safe space, this place where they can make mistakes and get in some messy at-bats to grow their confidence, to make it their own, right? So they feel like they're human selves as they're trying on this thing they learned, in service of being that much more confident and making the gap between learning something and trying it even smaller.
Wow. So does that shorten the forgetting curve as well, right? That Ebbinghouse's forgetting curve, is that part of this too?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I was at a sales enablement conference recently, and a lot of folks were talking about practice, but it was seen as something that you do later on as a kind of antidote to the forgetting curve, maybe 2 weeks or a month later as a refresher. But what we've found is that by baking practice directly into the learning experience, so even the learning, like right after you learn the information, in that moment you have a chance to try it on for size. And then of course there's more practice-based reinforcement that further helps to increase retention and comfort and confidence and general skillfulness around what folks are learning.
I'd even say too that even
Cool.
bringing up the forgetting curve is almost a little bit pulling our attention in the wrong direction, right? Because the idea of the forgetting curve is that you want people to remember the information better, which is assuming that all they need is to remember the information and they'll be good to go.
That's true.
But in reality, the very day they learned it, when it's definitely still, in their memory, they usually still can't do it on a real call, right? So it's not just about remembering stuff. It's about actually being able to pull it off in a real conversation when the stakes are high and you're under pressure and it's hard to think clearly. And that's an entirely different question than do they remember it, right? And that's the more important question to ask in sales is, can they actually do it? Because remembering it isn't enough.
That's a great point.
That is a great point. So the words you use though are different than maybe what I'd expect, and that is deliberate practice. So how is that defined? How do we define deliberate practice?
Yeah, so there are a number of elements that would make practice, what performance scientists consider deliberate. One is first acknowledging that selling is made up of a lot of smaller skills, all of which are used at different moments in the sales conversation. So oftentimes when you have a typical sales role play, you'll be on the hook as the seller, often in a high pressure situation where you're having to show your manager how good you are. You're on the hook for like doing the whole sales call, right? Opening it, doing your discovery, fielding objections. But that's too many balls to keep in the air if what you're looking to do in that moment of role play is actually build skill. So one of the really, really important principles that we all recognize from music and sports, right, that make practice deliberate is to break it down into these bite-sized pieces, these bite-sized skills that exist at certain moments in the conversation. So that's the first piece. Jonathan, do you want to talk about like the speed element too that makes for deliberateness?
Yeah, definitely. One thing that we noticed from looking at other disciplines is that when they were first learning a new skill, they weren't practicing it at game speed as they would come performance. They were taking the
Yeah.
time to slow it down. They were taking the time to really pay attention and be intentional about what they were doing, be aware of what they were doing, and when they needed to, pausing to think and give their brain that space to not get sucked down the path they normally go down and to think it through and choose a new path and do things differently. They were really focused on doing it well instead of doing it fast. And of course, there comes a time and a place as you become more and more skillful that you would practice it at full speed, but it's not when you're learning something new and not when you're trying to really change behaviors. You need to slow down for that to happen.
And the other element too is just really recognizing that practice, deliberate practice, and performance are two different things. When we typically do sales role plays, especially on our sales teams, like part of the underlying thing that we're trying to do is show everybody how fast we are or how good we get it or how skillful we already are so that our teammates will think we're so wonderful and our managers who are sitting there with their checklist will give us a high score. But that's actually performance. Like in practice, the mindset is really different. And with this slowing down and it breaking it down, what Jonathan said, pausing, making mistakes, stumbling, doubling back, keeping ourselves right at the edge of our abilities where we do make mistakes. And in those mistakes can develop awareness of different choices and new grooves is really fundamental for effective, deliberate practice. So separating, totally doing away with this idea that practice is a space where we can't make mistakes and instead creating the safety and encouraging mistake making as vital for building new skills and new awareness is a really, really fundamental kind of environment to grow for effective deliberate practice.
I'd say the last
So you,
pieces
oh, go
I'd
ahead.
say I'd say the last pieces that really make for deliberate practice, and as opposed to maybe a more traditional sales role play, is that with deliberate practice, you have a clear idea going into it of what good looks like. You're not just saying, "All right,
Yeah.
folks, we're throwing an objection your way. Do what you can." You're telling people in advance. This is what makes for an effective response. Now, I'm going to give you an opportunity to try this on for size, but you already know going into it what you're trying to do. And then you get immediate feedback right then and there on how your performance matched up against kind of the standard you were aiming for. And then you get an immediate opportunity to try it again and to take that
Yeah.
feedback you just got and implement it right away. Rather than what usually happens is you show up, you don't really know what good looks like, you just do the best you can, and then your manager gives you some feedback at the end, and then you sit down, it's the next person's turn. That's a good test, that's a good assessment to see where you're at, but that's not a way to build new skill, right? And to do things differently. To build new skill, you need to know what you're aiming for going into it. You need to get that immediate feedback and again, get that chance to implement the feedback right away.
Mm, that's in those. Yeah, that's so interesting. Breaking it apart into smaller, discrete pieces,
Yeah.
super important. Totally makes sense. Speed not as critical. More important to do it right, and then understanding what good looks like, combined with then the ability to redo it. That's so interesting and so good, right? I mean, I hear that, and it just makes so much sense to me that should be. So what are some of the obstacles? Why do more organizations not embrace practice?
There's so many reasons. So I'll just fire off a few and then Jonathan, I know
Yeah.
you'll be able to hop in too. So I think one is just the confusion around practice and performance, right? When we hear that it's practice time or role play time, all of a sudden we as sellers feel like the pressure is on. Managers are there to evaluate performance. So it just becomes something that nobody really enjoys. And because nobody enjoys it, and because there's not a dedicated focus on specific moments or specific skills, it doesn't actually end up being very effective. So either sales leaders do it and they're not seeing the ROI from it, or it just causes such stress and pressure and despair that sales teams drop it all together. So that's one reason. Jonathan, let's tag team here.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think of it in two buckets, and you kind of briefly touched on each of them. But one bucket is that it's a really, really uncomfortable, unpleasant experience for everybody. It's super awkward. It is this expectation of performance. The stakes are high, and it's unpleasant all around. But then the other piece, because I think people would power through the unpleasantness if they felt like it was really benefiting them. But the other piece is that in the absence of all the elements we listed above, doing a role play, I don't think actually makes people better. In the absence of knowing what you want going into it, of getting immediate feedback, of focusing on one piece at a time. If it's just like, all right, I'm going to pretend I'm a buyer and you pretend you're a seller and let's just do our thing. And okay, great. You aren't really growing any new skill. You aren't getting any better. All you're doing is the thing you're already skilled enough to do, and you're just doing it in front of your peers now. Sometimes getting feedback at the end, sometimes not. But just repetition does not grow skill, right? Repetition on its own does not grow skill. Simple example of this is think of tying your shoes. We tie our shoes every single day for decades on end. And generally speaking, after like age 12, we don't get any better at it. Driving too, right? Would you say that people get better and better at driving the older and older they get? I don't think so. Clearly, repetition isn't
I
enough.
live in Florida. Absolutely,
Absolutely
not.
not. Clearly, repetition isn't enough. To grow skill, you need all the elements we introduced of, again, knowing what good looks like, getting immediate feedback, focusing on one piece at a time, having the expectation of failure rather than the expectation of performance. So all of those elements we described are really essential to make role play an actual skill building experience that makes people better, instead of just showing up, doing what you're already good enough to do in front of people, and then going back to your desk and wondering, why did I just do that? Right? So I think that's why teams don't do it. It's really uncomfortable because leaders aren't good at creating psychological safety in the environment. And then it's not really
Yeah.
effective because they aren't following the principles of deliberate practice. So it's not a good use of people's time.
Wow, that's so interesting. The I've found that the number one reason that they don't do it is because they don't have real scenarios. They don't push hard enough to make it real. To actually get some live fire in there. So, but your point about it, because it wasn't safe, because it's a performance instead of practice, right? I mean, of course, performance, I'm going to do the best I can, not try to improve, right? That totally makes sense because performance time, I know if I got to swing as hard as I can here. And if I fail, oh, I failed and oh no, I stink. So that's interesting. That's interesting. Jordana, you're shaking your head and smiling at me. What you
Y-
thinking?
Yeah, no, this just come back to me in a second. I just lost my train of
Okay.
thought. What did you just say
It's
before
not a realistic scenario.
the performance? Oh, it's not a realistic scenario. Here's the thing. This is what's really interesting. It doesn't have to be really effective because it's not the realism that makes for the development of the skill. It's the identification of what the specific skill is. So for example, let's say you're wanting to work on making your demos more of an engaging back and forth rather than a feature dumping monologue, right? And we all intellectually know that that's what our demo should be. And most of us don't really know how to do that. Okay. So we could say, oh, we just need more realistic prospect scenarios where, a prospect is cutting in at certain moments or is articulating certain needs or maybe is disinterested in our features and, like a real prospect might be. And then this becomes, fertile ground for skill development. But in fact, what we found is it's like, well, like what is an actual element? What is something that a seller can do to create more buy-in and engagement and participation from a prospect during a demo? Well, there's a specific moment after you as a seller talk about a feature that's ripe for engagement. We just have to ask a question that engages them. And most sellers, of course, might say, well, do you have any questions or does that make any sense? Or maybe a lot of us have been told just ask better questions. And you're like, well, what the hell am I supposed to ask after I've shared my feature? But what Jonathan and I have done in one of our labs around demos is identified 3 distinct question types that you can ask to engage your buyers in a different way to help them articulate the value of what they're seeing or to visualize the solution in their world or even just to share what's going through their mind as they said that. And I share all of this because the answer to how to create more effective demo practice to our mind isn't necessarily to up the realism. It's just to get really clear on what the skill is, what the moment is, what an example of great of that skill is, and zoom in there, and you let your practice partner totally off the hook for playing a really authentic prospect, but you still give the practicer really effective, clear practice and directives for how to get to great.
As maybe
So
as
go
evidence
ahead,
of the
Jonathan.
effectiveness of what Jordan has described, throughout the entire history of the practice lab, 99% of the sessions we've run have been with mixed groups of sellers from different companies, from different industries, who don't know anything about each other's ICPs, who have never once witnessed one of their partners' sales calls happening, and they're still able to play effective enough partners for this form of practice to happen because, as Jordana said, we're breaking it into small pieces, we're giving clear guidance on what good looks like. In that environment, you don't need a super realistic partner to do this sort of practice.
Mm, mm. So, what objections do sellers give you as to like when they're in there? I mean, do they just immediately fall over and say, "Yes, I'd like to practice more"? I mean, what are you hearing from sellers, and how do you overcome those?
It's so funny you asked that, because when Jonathan and I started out on this project, we were like, all right, maybe 10% of sellers, if we're lucky, are going to want to do this practice thing. We're like, are we comfortable building a real, like an entire company around a very small sliver of the, of the market, and having a pretty small addressable universe? But what we found again and again, and this is with hand raising executives in our cohort, with random salespeople that we've never met before and didn't even know they were showing up to a practice-based event, to teams who have a history of really disliking role play, and they've tried in spite of their best efforts to get a culture of practice going and have never been able to do it. Across the board, I would say sellers consistently are game to try, get a lot of satisfaction from knowing exactly what they should be doing, and relish in the permission. And this is, I think, where practice gets made or broken. Relish in the permission to not be smooth, to make mistakes, to try something, to experiment, to ask for feedback, because all of us as human beings, going back to this fundamental idea of like selling as an act of humanity, right? All of us love pushing ourselves and challenging ourselves and moving towards mastery and growing our abilities. But we don't want to do that in an environment that feels unsafe, right? Where we're going to be ridiculed or made fun of or made to feel like failures. So Jonathan and I think a lot, especially when we go into sales teams that we've never worked with before, about how to set the container and what signals to send to help people realize that this is a safe place. And once they feel that, and a lot of sellers don't feel that anywhere else in their sales lives, it's like they just release into it and give it their all. And the we've been surprised, let's just say, by how excited people are about this, how rewarding they find it, and how much they tell us they want more.
Yeah, no, really surprised. It's like the inverse of what we expected. Most people actually want
Yeah.
more. And we'll even do surveys after like working with a team to ask them, do you want more practice like this? And the last team that we did, we asked that question, and quite literally 100% of the attendees said, yeah, I'd like more of this. So when you're creating a psychologically safe space, when you're structuring the practice in a way that reps can actually feel their skill growing during the session, they want more of that, because most sellers want to sell better. They want to be better. They want to feel competent. They want to feel confident. And of course, they want higher commission checks. So if you present them with a psychologically safe place to practice and clear guidelines in a way that they can actually feel their skill growing, most people are going to want more of it.
Wow, wow, that's awesome. That's
It's
awesome.
cool.
So, yeah, that is cool, right? I mean, that's exciting for me. You know, I've got chills here thinking about that. I mean, that is fun, right? I don't remember the last time that I had a safe space to practice, fail, and improve in. So that's great. That's really great. So with that, how do people start this if they want a journey towards better practice? Like, what's the first step? So Jonathan, what's the first step from you? And Jordana, I guess whatever Jonathan says, what's the next logical step after that?
Well, I think obviously there are ways that you can engage with the practice lab, either with our free offerings or our paid offerings. That can be a first step. But if you want to do a first step on your own to do this, honestly, I'd recommend buying one of those books that I mentioned at the top, Peak, or the talent code. As much as we sound brilliant on this call, all we're doing is taking what these researchers figured out and applying it to the world of sales, right? I don't think any of these are original ideas. We just took whatever the discipline is doing and found a way to make it work in the world of sales. So Peak and the Talent Code, if you want to start doing this on your own, are great books to start with. There's certainly more, right? We've read plenty, but those are the two I would start with to really teach you what this deliberate practice thing is all about, so you can start bringing more to your sales team.
The other thing I would just say is that if you are a sales leader or an enablement leader who's excited about this practice thing, but you don't have a culture of practice on your team and you're encountering a lot of resistance, you're going to need to go overtime in helping people to understand just how different a space, the practice space is, than how the rest of the team may feel. And you can actually, I mean, the thing that really lights me up about practice, Phil, is the fact that practice, in my experience, when you create a safe space for teams to practice, that creates a kind of culture that spills outside of practice. So you can have a psychologically safe culture already that's primed for practice and then just hop right in. But you can actually use practice to help build psychological safety on your broader team culture. And not to be too much of a geek here, but there's this amazing paper called, I think it's called Psychological Safety in Work Teams. But this researcher identified a handful of key behaviors called learning behaviors that, when present, indicate a high level of psychological safety on a team. And we all know psychological safety leads to more happiness, better retention, higher performance, all that stuff. And those behaviors are taking risks, failing, asking for feedback, and sharing new information with the group, right? And all of those things happen in the practice space. So if you can telegraph to your reps and just state to them that this is a place to learn and experiment, to get messy, to get awkward, to feel uncomfortable, and to be held in that experience, you're going to have reps who feel safer trying it on for size. And once they get to know each other and you as a leader in the context of that safe space, it's pretty powerful how that can affect the rest of the team culture. So in summary, if you're going to do a practice thing and you don't already have a culture of psychological safety in practice, really make sure that your reps know this is a place where they're coming to learn, grow, fail, and improve.
Yeah. Awesome. I love that. Well, you guys shared so much. We're going to have to do this again, but I encourage folks, if you're excited about this conversation like I am, I encourage you to get to know Jordana and Jonathan more. You go to the practicelab.co, check them out. They're both on LinkedIn as well. Get to know them, understand all about deliberate practice from them. Jonathan mentioned 2 books, Peak as well as The Talent Code. Yeah. I have not read either one of them, though I'm familiar with The Talent Code, so that'll be my homework before we talk again. Really great stuff, though. Super appreciate your time, and know that deliberate practice is the difference for folks. So thank you both so much. This was great.
And we even have an offer for folks who are listening to this.
Ooh, you got an offer? Ooh, let's go. We got an offer.
Well, so first of all, if you're a seller or enabler who's excited to try this deliberate practice-based approach, for developing your sales skills on for size, we have a monthly meetup called the Practice Club that meets on the first Wednesday of every month. It's free, 12 to 1 Eastern, and you can sign up at club.thepracticelab.co. But also, if you're a sales or enablement leader who wants to bring this kind of practice that we're talking about to your team, email hello@thepracticelab.co, because we are going to run a free private practice session for 3 teams who email us in the month of April.
Ooh, so 3 teams.
3 teams
can get free practice.
A free hour-long practice session with us.
Right?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's it.
Wow, that's awesome. That's really cool. So thought we were done, but we're not. So go to the club.thepracticelab.co.
Club.thepracticelab.co.
I'll fix that. Yep. So don't pay attention pay no attention to the man on the screen there. Phil can't type, right? Club.thepracticelab.co.
Yeah.
Right. And then email hello@thepracticelab.co. Check that out. And 3 teams can get an hour-long free practice session. I love that. That's super helpful and super added value for anybody who's listening. So we'll make sure this gets out. We'll do this again sometime soon. And I mean it. This was great. So folks, get to know Jordana and Jonathan more, go to thepracticelab.co, check them out, learn more, get smarter, and start practicing. Great stuff.